The Epstein files are triggering reinterpretations of QAnon origins and mythology. As co host of Conspirituality, I'm familiar with this history, and unfortunately, what I see coming is an intuition versus evidence conflict over these reinterpretations, and it may pit disinformation researchers against the left instead of the right. One thing that might ease that tension is to remember that a conspiracy theory, before it's verified and before it's weaponized by fascists, is often a form of folk wisdom for the working class. So people who spent their lives researching QAnon posts and users through granular details like trip codes and meme wars concluded years ago it was an anti-Semitic, nihilistic, irony-poisoned LARP hosted and accelerated by the father-son duo of Jim and Ron Watkins. It jumped the tracks into boomer Facebook in the early days of the pandemic and fueled the rising MAGA movement, taking on a life and credibility of its own with an anarchic cast of two-bit prophets, believers, and profiteers. Now, that forensic analysis is different from an analysis of the cultural labor QAnon did for its believers, which in my opinion was to create an ersatz criticism of capitalist abuse, to criticize capitalism without naming it. But exposing the origins of Q or showing its connections to blood libel or the satanic panic did not on its own soothe the lived experience of systemic abuse of women and children, especially when there's never accountability. Knowing how something happened never answers why. But Epstein gives us the why. He shows us the intention is insatiable power. He shows us the smug faces behind the masks in Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. But the torrent of information will make the how process harder, especially when folks intuitively connect the use of pizza in the Epstein files with Pizzagate. Interpretations that erupt from the feeling rather than the forensic side of things may reach for new connections that may or may not be stable. Here's one example I saw. Pizzagate and QAnon were not onto something. They were orchestrated by pedophiles to make accusing people of pedophilia make you look insane so that they could continue doing pedophile shit. Now, that's going to make a lot of emotional sense to a lot of people, including me, but it can obscure the solid research we already have. And we know from sexual assault and child abuse survivor advocates that speculation does not make things safer for survivors because it narrows their pathways to being heard and believed. And at the same time, the debunking side has to be careful not to sound dismissive of speculations erupting from deep intuitions. So whether it's QAnon animating MAGA with shitposts or the Epstein files sparking revolutionary rage against MAGA with troves of data, as well as survivor testimonies, the cultural work is similar. Working people are finding evidence for their lifelong sense that something has always been terribly wrong with our systems of power. That knowledge comes from facts, but it also comes from the intuitions that precede the establishment of facts. And I hope people in those two lanes can listen to each other along the way.